you are doing well. It is Antoinetta Mosley of I Follow the Leader, and we are here for episode 43, Why Change Fails. I am so excited for you to be here today. You are going to meet the amazing, the marvelous Veronica LaFemina. She is awesome. I have had the opportunity to get to know her, and you are in for a treat today. Today, we're going to be speaking with Veronica, and she's the founder and CEO of La Femina & Co. It's an advisory firm that supports nonprofits and social impact businesses at the intersection of strategy, culture, communications, and change management. Veronica has been featured in Inc. magazine, The Today Show, NPR, and more. And she regularly blogs about nonprofit leadership, strategy, and culture. We will be sure to link her information because you definitely want to follow what she is doing. During this conversation, we're going to discuss a specific blog, Why Change Fails, in which Veronica shared 6 of the most common reasons change fails based on her experiences as a consultant and senior executive. You are in for a treat today. Veronica, thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
Thanks so much, Antoinetta. I am thrilled to be here, of course, with you and to talk about this really important topic. When we talk about change, we sometimes have like a really rosy picture of what's going to happen and don't always understand what doesn't work. So really thrilled to be here with you today.
Awesome. And is there anything else we should know about what you are doing right now? What's really exciting you in this work with nonprofits and other organizations?
Yeah, I am so happy to see more nonprofits really thinking about how we're going to get stuff done in this new time, right? Like we talk about the new normal, what's next. But what we're seeing with some of the, cultural awakenings in some regards that are happening with regard to how we live as a society and how we work and interact with one another, I think we are at this really important moment of understanding that the human beings who power our organizations have needs and also are critical to our success. And so when we think about how do we make these organizations really meaningful, effective for the people who power them, we're better able to support the people we serve. And so that's a trend that I've been really excited to see in orgs and to be working with leaders on as they understand more about the fact, like, we're not machines. We really need to get good at the people side of change.
No, that's so important. And we're living through a time of the great resignation, of quiet quitting, right? We're living through this time where people are feeling more courageous and empowered to make decisions about their life. And I think, right, that's also a time where leaders, managers, change agents really need to make sure they understand people, but also what we're talking about. Do you understand change? And so let me know what prompted you to write this blog, Why Change Fails.
Yeah. So first I'll say I'm a practitioner, right? There are a lot of great like theories out there on change management. There are, probably folks who are familiar with John Kotter or with like ProSci's ADKAR model. I am a ProSci certified change management professional. So there's all this good information out there. And it's a lot. And for most nonprofit organizations I know, the reality is they're not going to implement a sophisticated or overly complex change management approach, right? It's just maybe you don't have the people, maybe you don't have the resources, maybe it feels like, yeah, that's nice for organizations that have a ton of extra people available to help out, but that's not us. And so as a practitioner in the field, right, I have been part of changes that like tanked, where we were like, what happened here? And I've also had the opportunity to see, okay, what works in real life? Like, doesn't just look good on paper, doesn't just sound good in theory, but like what's actually working so that we get from the way we are now to the way we desire to be. And so that was like a huge inspiration for me is when we don't know some of the big pitfalls, it's really, really easy to kind of fail from the beginning instead of fail while trying.
Yes, I think that's such a key. And Veronica and I relate a lot on the nonprofit side of things, and we've both been in that field, and so have that direct experience. And I think that's what's so amazing about those that work with you, right? You've been there, right? So you're not this pie in the sky trying to explain this is what works, but you haven't done it before. And I think that's so powerful to go, I actually have been in situations that have worked well, but also, right, that fail from the beginning. And that can be very terrifying for employees if they feel like from the start, this is doomed to fail. So I want to read to you all one of the excerpts we put in from the blog, and then we're just going to get into some of these reasons why change fails. So, something Veronica shared was knowing why change initiatives fail can help leaders honestly assess how ready their organization is for a given change and avoid common pitfalls to help ensure the change's success. And so I want you to tell us a little about that, because often we feel like we're ready for change. And so I love that excerpt of, are you ready for change? Are you prepared? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that works well just in life as human beings in different elements is checklists, right? Like we like them for our grocery shopping. The checklist manifesto transformed the way that hospitals work to make sure surgery was safer. Like we like to have some good guideposts to follow. And when we are so excited about a new change, so excited about this opportunity ahead of us, we sometimes forget our checklist of like, okay, do we have all of our ingredients to make sure this change is going to be successful, right? Like I like to say, if you leave the eggs out of cake, it's not a cake anymore, right? It might be brownies, it might be something else, right? But it's not what you were looking to make. And so by getting clear on some of the main reasons that change fails, we can really start to think, okay, what are the ingredients to success here? What are the things that I know that if I don't have this, maybe we aren't ready. Maybe now is not the time. I mean, you and I have talked so much, Antoinetta, about, especially when we're talking about culture change initiatives and organizations, right? Who is leading that change? Just real talk, like especially in the nonprofit sector, but really across working life, the way that power is distributed and managed in organizations comes from upper level leadership, the executive team. And so many organizations, even when they want to start like a great employee resource group, or they're really interested in bringing staff into that change, what they forget to do is have a visible and active executive sponsor engaged throughout the whole process. And, I think a lot of executive leaders say, well, I can be that person. I love to speak up for issues I care about. I really believe this is important. But then if you look at their calendar and how they're spending their time and what their availability truly looks like, they may have the desire, but not the capacity. And so getting really clear on, does the executive sponsor of this change have the capacity? So not just like the want, but like the actual ability to participate is so crucial. Over 20 years, ProSci has been doing research on change management, right? So they are kind of like, what works, what doesn't? For practitioners in the field, what are you guys seeing? Number one, the most important factor for any change is visible and active executive sponsorship throughout the entire change. So that doesn't mean through the launch. The launch is just the beginning, right? We do a great job preparing, and then we have the launch, just the beginning. It's really got to be through the whole time. So as an executive leader, you have to ask yourself, can I do this for 2 years? Can I do it for 3? Can I do it for longer if that's what it takes? And that's a question we don't always see leadership teams asking themselves when it comes to these changes.
Thank you. No, that's so beautiful. And for those who are new, you'll see me looking down and around. I like to take notes, and I love that, right? The desire versus the capacity is really, really important. And something also important, right? You've talked about the history. This and something we talked about in preparation was this isn't a trend, right? Some people think that change management or even employees, right, wanting more at their workplaces is a now trend. And when you look into that research and you shared some of that, this isn't a trend. This is something organizations have been struggling with for a very long time. So I want to transition, and you went over the first point, which is right, really talking about that executive sponsor and are they ready to be present? And I love that question. And I know we have a lot of leaders and CEOs who listen. And so I love that question, Veronica. You were like, not for 2 months, not at the launch. Do you have the capacity for 2 years to really be sponsoring and spearheading this change? So I think that's important. I want to say hello to everyone here. Hello, Margie. Margie said, love this live broadcast. She's listening in her car. It's really great with conversations with I Follow the Leader. You can listen, you can watch all the things. So if you are listening or watching and you're in a place to do so, feel free to let us know where are you listening and watching from. Veronica and I, which this is rare, but we're actually down the road from each other. So I'm in Durham and she is in Raleigh area. So that is always fun. So let us know where are you listening or watching from. And Margie, thank you for being here. All right. So number one in your post was really that executive sponsor is absent. Number two, you have the wrong executive sponsor. And so
Yeah.
anything you want to share about that, having the wrong person take the reins?
Right. So an executive sponsor needs credibility, right? And credibility has to come from a few different areas when we're talking about change. You and I have both seen what happens when an organization delegates a really important like culture change initiative to an employee resource group or maybe a more junior staff member. They could have super high trust levels from their colleagues. They could be personally very well equipped to get people on board for what's happening. But if they don't have the budget, if they don't have the authority to make decisions without having to run everything up to the executive team, then they're not the right executive sponsor for the change. And the reason for that is when we talk about change messaging, for example, employees want to hear from the executive leadership about why this change is needed and what it means for the future of the organization. What they want to hear from their peers and their supervisors is, what does this mean for me? Like, okay, I'm on board and I see why we're going there, but what does it mean for me? And I think this is really important, especially in environments where there's been a lot of change. Seeing that the executive team not only cares about what's going on, but is actually putting their time and energy and budgetary resources toward it matters to staff. It matters to them, and it affects how much they are willing to invest in that change. Because when you've been a part of lots of changes, you're exhausted. And you're like, well, is this going to be like that last one that failed 4 months ago? Is this going to be like the thing that I put all my hope and energy and effort in? And then ultimately the executive team said, oh, we don't have the budget for that, or this isn't as much of a priority as, you know, this particular programming we want to do, or this revenue target we're trying to meet. So the wrong executive sponsor doesn't mean that you can't have amazing, you know, staff leaders and change agents who are part of it, but you still need that person at the top who is going to put their money where their mouth is and who's going to put their time and energy where their mouth is too.
I love that. And, you know, our framework at I Follow the Leader, the number one thing, you know, for diversity, equity, inclusion, for culture change, we say leadership has to affirm it's a strategic priority. And that seems really easy if you just say that. However, I love all of those, right, guide markers that you just shared, right? So there has to be budget, resources. It truly has to be a priority where, again, we're talking about that longevity, the sustainability, where you don't want employees investing all of their bandwidth for something that actually isn't something you want to be sustainable. It was just a great idea at the moment, right? That can be really damaging to teams. And I think that's so important that you mention that. And along those lines, right, just not knowing where you're going. Number 3 in the article was you do not define success. So tell us about that. Why can that lead to failure?
Sure. So when we think about like running a race or learning a new hobby or doing something else that either is time bound or where there's a very clear success measure, we know what success is. Success is crossing that finish line. Or it could be, like let's say you're taking up knitting. I want to make a hat. The hat, that's success. With change initiatives, we often don't take the time up front to pause and say, what will it look like when we've gotten this right? So we may establish a couple of important key performance indicators or like a milestone, like by X date, this will happen. And those are important. But what I would really encourage leaders to think through is, what will it look like in your organization? How will it feel? What will you hear staff say? Because sometimes we have like an abstract idea of success, like we will be an equity first organization. That's what success looks like. Cool. How will we know we got there, right? And so when we think about, like, I think one of the ways to think about this is because so many organizations are trying to adapt new technology right now. So success isn't, hey, we implemented the new CRM. Like it's live, it's going. Success is people are using that CRM every day in their work, both to document their conversations, to keep their data, and then also to use that data to inform new decision making. And so when we like put the marker in the ground at like, hooray, it's live, then we're going to be dealing with years and years of people not using it the way it's supposed to be used, of people not really like taking that change and making it our new way of working. So that's another good framing question is, how will this become our new way of working? And what does it look like to do it our way, right? Not everybody else's way, not like a best practice way. What does it look like to do it our way at the end? And when we can document some of that, it gets a lot easier to know when we've made it. Because otherwise we have mismatched expectations about this leader thinks success looks like X and this one thinks it looks like Y. And so then we struggle to know if we have really converted our culture or converted our way of working to this new way.
So important. What gets measured, right? Peter Drucker gets managed. And so I think that's so important that so many people, and even, right, I love how you've been sharing personal examples as well as professional ones. If you don't set that target, it's going to be much harder to keep a habit, to stay on track if you don't know what the end goal is. And it is amazing. Some of these things that we're talking about may seem this is obvious. However, a lot, I will say many organizations are jumping into change without having these conversations, right? You may have one leader who is spearheading the change or being the sponsor, and they may not even talk to the other executives. I love that question. Many of the questions Veronica shared. So make sure to listen back, write these down. You're getting some great consulting advice. But how will it be our new way of working? What will it look like when we've gotten it right? Right? Those prompts are important. Like Veronica shared in the beginning, having those checklists for any type of change and going through, having someone like Veronica take you through that process, it's often much better to have someone from the outside coming in, especially when you may have one group or or executive sponsor who's really passionate, but maybe it's not the right change, or maybe it is. So definitely think it's so important that when you're about to embark on major change, major cultural shifts, that you bring someone from the outside in. I'll use some of your analogies, right? So if you're going to run a race, or if you want to lose weight, etc., right? You will probably get there quicker with a trainer or a dietitian, etc. Even if you know what to do, having that person to guide you through can be so important. So thank you, Veronica. Yeah, so important. Number 4, you don't have communications in training plans. So you talked about the launch. Yay. What if you don't have those plans in place?
Yeah, so this is a big one, right? Again, when we treat the end of a change as, hey, we implemented that thing or we announced that thing, instead of realizing that's just the beginning, we forget that. And I think this happens a lot with executives and maybe not understanding it as much. Like, you may have been talking about this change for 6 months, for 9 months, for what feels like forever. Your team is hearing about it once. How are we expecting them, right, to have all the information they need about why the change is needed, about what it looks like to be part of it, getting them excited, like, I'm all in, and then the knowledge and ability to actually change, right? So a lot of times I think what happens too with leaders is, let's say you have, like, again, let's go with a technology implementation. You probably are not the primary user of that system. Like, you may not even be a secondary user of that system, if we're being real. And so what may seem like an obvious answer to you, like, yeah, we're going to do this, it's better for the organization, look at how, like, modern and advanced we'll be, is meaning that you are fundamentally changing the way people are coming to work and showing up every day. And so if you don't recognize that difference and then prepare for it well, not just like the executive team can speak to it, but supervisors can speak to it, managers can speak to it. I always talk about, we have to give those leaders in the middle the tools they need to be the leaders we expect them to be, right? Otherwise, they just feel like the change is being done to them at the same time too. So having a consistent communications plan, right, which includes, how will we communicate? Who's the right messenger based on what works well in change communications? What does it look like to keep that communication and momentum going? How do we make sure our change agents and, like, our early adapters are involved in helping us tell the story of this change? And making sure that training is meaningful, right? Not just cursory, not just, look, we put together this 90-minute session, but really that it is getting to the core of someone being like, yeah, but how do I do that? What does it look like? And making sure that those are in place. I talk about sometimes that as kids, we practice everything, right? We learn a new skill by practicing over and over and over again. And as grownups, we are, like, terrible at letting ourselves practice. We just either expect to be good at it or expect it to happen right the first time. And we don't practice some of these things around, like, okay, how would we communicate well? What would training look like? Can we test those things out on a change that might be smaller, so that when it comes to big changes, we already have our process down. We have that in place and staff know what to expect from us. So not having the plans and then not executing the plans, right, are big reasons why change falls off. People are disengaged. I'm not hearing about it from the executive team, so it must not be a priority anymore.
Yes, and I will say this is one of the largest ones we hear today relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we will tell leaders, they're often doing all of this hard work in the background. You have got to set a schedule to share with your stakeholders what is going on, especially if they have invested any of their time into it. right? So whether they've taken a survey, participated in focus groups, if you go silent, why would they take the next survey, right, for the next initiative or the next change, or even the next year to see how well it's gone? And so I think that's so important. I want to pull up this question that we have, and it says, how does onboarding of new folks fit into the change management plan? How do you help them drink the Kool-Aid when current folks may not have done so yet? So thank you for this question.
Yeah, Margie, this is a perfect question, and it comes up a lot. So a couple of things. One is your onboarding is your way of telling new staff, this is who we are and how we do things. And so there is no reason that your onboarding materials and training have to wait for a change to be completely done to say, this is who we are and where we're headed. I think before, right, we would invest all this money in onboarding training or onboarding approaches, and it would feel like maybe it's a couple years before we update that. But with the technology we have today, we can be a little scrappier about that and instead, really update that more often to reflect where we are. I also encourage it, like being upfront in interview processes, right? If you're in the middle of a big change, talk about it, because you will also then attract people who are interested in being part of that change. And when it comes to, communicating with staff who are still thinking about wanting to participate and integrating new staff to that, two things that are really important is, one, we have to state our intention as leaders. So not just here's what we're doing, but like, here's what I'm trying to accomplish at this organization by doing this. Here's my intent for what this change will do. Staff want to hear what we're thinking, not just that we have the perfect plan, right? Here's where I'm headed. Because they're also willing to say, well, if that's your intention, here's where I'm stuck. Here's what's not working for me about that. And it creates a dialogue and a conversation that allows them to more fully explain where they are. In addition to that intention, regular communication is a big part of it. And being honest. Hey, we're in the middle of this, right? And that might mean that in one-on-one meetings, right, with new staff who are like, hey, so I thought we were doing things this way, but this person doesn't really seem to be doing that. I'm feeling a little confused. For supervisors to say, hey, you know what? We are in the middle of this. And Cindy's been here for years and has done things this particular way. And so we're all working to say, how can we make this new way our way? And that's going to mean, right, that's for Cindy, it may take a little longer. So appreciate you being with us for this journey, and also know we're all going to change at our own pace.
Thank you. Thank you. Great question and great answer. Really practical advice. We are going to link. So you've gotten such an amazing preview of this blog. And so we are going to link it. And there are two more elements that I want you to read about. Number 5 is you're changing too much too fast. I know a lot of people have seen that. And then 6, you yourself aren't ready for change. And so we talked about that a little bit in the beginning. But Veronica, I want to just end by talking about change saturation, because that's a word I didn't hear while in the workplace, while working in nonprofits, that I think is so beautiful. So can you just explain a little to us about change saturation and its importance in this journey?
Yeah. So when we change a lot, or when we have so many changes going on at the same time, we are removing control from our teams over the work they have, right? So we're saying, okay, like if these are the components of your job, but there's a change initiative affecting this one and this one in the middle and this one over here, we are making things more tenuous for our teams. They may lose confidence in their ability to do the job. They may be asking questions like, can't leadership see how hard things are right now? Whether it's COVID times, some of the other cultural elements we're seeing, like, don't they get it? And so as leaders, we have to step back and say, are we ready to add yet another new equation. The other thing like that is important with change saturation is all change involves loss. All of it, even when it's a change for the better. It involves a loss of way of doing things, a loss of control, a loss of understanding about who we are and what's going on. And so when we push a bunch of change on people, we're effectively pushing a ton of loss and then the grief that comes with that loss on them. And for anyone who's ever grieved, in personal or professional settings, it is very hard to regain your energy and your purpose without appropriate time to honor that loss or work through it. It's something I talk about, and I actually have a blog post about this too, about kind of rituals we can create to honor loss in our organizations. But when we think about change saturation as we have just maxed people out on loss and grief, we cannot expect them to be able to come back and be ready and give more when they're still working through all of that. And so as leaders, if we can be really smart about saying change takes multiple years, it takes me and being visible and present. How many big changes realistically can we do? And let's be happy, not about announcing a bunch of stuff, but instead about being really good at making change stick, right? We don't want it to just work in the moment. We want it to last. And that is the frame that if we can bring, we can reset ourselves about going from this frenetic pace of change to consistent, meaningful change that will drive success in our organizations.
I mean, so beautiful. And I'm sorry for those who are just listening, but I'm just nodding. Our framework, Veronica's work are so similar. And so I just love what you're saying. And I think it's so important for those who are listening to really pause and think about that. How many big changes can you do well? And so I'm talking a lot right now about this, effectiveness over efficiency. And I think a lot of organizations are trying to be really efficient and do 100 things, whereas it would actually have more impact if they were more effective and did a few of these big change things well. In our personal lives, when we have a lot of big changes at one time, it can be very difficult to manage. And so for some reason, I love how Veronica's sharing the rituals and relating it back to personal, because remember, everyone in your organization also has a personal life and personal things going on, and we're still living through a pandemic and these things. And so what may have worked 5 to 10 years ago isn't likely going to work today. And so I think that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to pass it back over to you. Any final thoughts for those who are listening or watching?
I just want to say change is hard. And it is okay to know that, right? Being a leader in this environment, in kind of the way we're living right now, there's not really a playbook. I always joke, no one really has a playbook for parenting during a pandemic, right? We're all figuring it out together. And that's true of work life right now as well. The point of understanding why change fails isn't to say look, you've totally done it wrong, but it is to give you the tools as a leader to say, how can I avoid this and make sure we are ready? How important are these changes that I'm thinking about? Is it that I'm excited about them and so I want to move them forward? Or are they fundamentally what's necessary to get us to be a new kind of organization or to work in a new way? And so I just want to honor that for people too. I think leaders feel like they're being, hit from every direction with you should be doing this, you should be doing that. But getting really good at change leadership and change management will improve your mission impact. It'll improve your operations. It'll improve employee morale. It'll improve your revenue. And to your point, Antoinetta, it actually is more efficient to be more effective. Right? It just is true. We think we're being efficient, but really we're just doing a lot and not getting the results we want. And so being able to really take that step back and be thoughtful and considerate about change, and to take some of these practical steps to say like, okay, what's that going to actually work in my org? What works for us matters in making it all more effective and helping us be the orgs we want to be.
Beautiful. Well, we appreciate you so much for coming on. This is so important, right? I know this will be an episode that people are listening to for years to come, because it really is something that people need to know. How do we have sustainable change, right? Change that our stakeholders can get on board with. And I just love the things that you acknowledge. And I think it's so important that we acknowledge change is hard. It's going to be difficult, right? And we may not always get it right. So thank you so much. To connect with Veronica, you can go to lafemina.co. So lafemina.co. In the show notes, we will also link to some of her other channels so you can connect with her, so you can read this blog, and so you can subscribe. She has some great thoughts. I'm going to let you know Veronica's going viral. She has some really good content. Please, and I tell people this, don't just follow her on LinkedIn, connect with her, right? We're in this follow age. No, connect with her.
Yeah, we're all in this together. Like that's,
yes.
How we create change, right, is definitely through making those connections. So
I love it. So yes, connect with her. Let her know your thoughts about the show. Don't just follow. She won't even know you heard this show. So connect with her. She is amazing, brilliant, and someone that you should be connected with. So Veronica, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Antoinetta. It's always great to have these conversations with you.
Yes, thank you. Everyone, that was great. I take a lot of notes. I need to pause and reflect, and so don't just listen to this podcast and go back to your long to-do list. Really take the time. This is a great episode to actually listen to with your team, and then reflect on the changes that we're making, the changes that we're looking to for the next year, which if you're listening live, right, that's 2023. Are they realistic? Are they attainable? Have we gotten the right buy-in? Do we have the right executive sponsor? Is this the right time? So thank you so much, Veronica. Amazing episode. This was episode 43, Why Change Fails, with Veronica LaFemina. Just great person, great friend of mine. And so happy to have her here. We have some exciting episodes coming up. We just finished our summer series where you got to hear from me way too much. And so don't worry, we have our guests coming back. Make sure to subscribe at ifollowtheleader.com/subscribe. We publish to our newsletter list first about our new episodes. We have one more coming in September and another in October with some amazing guests. Thank you so much for your time today, and we will see